Hey Studio, Nicolette here, one of the ACM Studio officers. I'll be giving the Autodesk Maya version of the Fundamentals of Modeling workshop. So far, you guys should have already seen us talk about the first part of the presentation, which is fundamentals. And that's more going over the different softwares available for 3D art, as well as basic rules like trying to stick with quads instead of creating n-gons, all the basics like that. And if you haven't looked over the presentation, I would advise you do that before watching this video. I'll link the presentation on this YouTube link as well. But let me go over how to make the axolotl model, your first model, through Autodesk Maya. All right, so when you first boot up Maya, you'll be able to see all your recent projects as well as be able to start a new project or open a previous project. In this video, am working with Autodesk Maya 2023, but there are always updates, and so I would advise getting the newest version. So you'll press New if you're starting a new project. And then this will take you to the viewport. All right, and there's a lot of things on the viewport which we'll have to go over, but I'll just go over the most important parts. So the first thing that you should be doing, unfortunately did not do this earlier when I was recording the video, but you'll go to File and then Project Window, and from there you can name the current project. You'll press New, which is on the right of Current Project, then rename it, and then you can accept. You can change the location that it's on your computer, but this is basically creating the project which you're working on the specific file in. And if you already have a project that you want to save this file to, you would instead click Set Project. And then you would assign this file to be saved in the project that you want it to be saved in. And then Control S is Save Scene. I usually will do that throughout the video, which is why you don't see me going File, Save Scene all the time. But yeah, you need to be saving really regularly because Maya tends to crash. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do before creating my model is importing my reference. Around the left side of the screen, you can change how how the viewport is displayed, and I'm picking the one with 4 squares, and it's allowing me to look at multiple perspectives at once. And I'm going to change the perspective of one of these windows to front, and once I get to the correct view, I'll go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. We're going to look for that file. So I've saved it in my Downloads folder, so I'll get the reference from there. And then once you find that photo, you can just open it or double click. And there, it's popped up in our scene. All right, and I'm adjusting it. So you'll see me moving back and forth between different editing tools in the software. That's because I'm doing QWER. And QWER is Q is select mode, and then W is move, and E is rotate, and R is scale. And you can also, it's on the very left of the screen, there are icons for this, but you do want to get in habit of memorizing these hotkeys because you'll be using these tools so regularly. Currently, I'm working in centimeters, and that's usually better because if you're importing into Unity, you'll want to be in centimeters because meters will be too big. You can edit that, I believe, under the project settings and under File, Project Settings, or Edit Project Settings. But yeah, you can always change it in Unity too. It's just helpful to keep things to the same unit. All right, so I am going to create shapes to make the general body. If you go into the Poly Modeling tab, you will be able to see there are a bunch of options for basic shapes. So because the head and the midsection are mainly spherical, I'm going to select the sphere and put it into place. Sphere specifically, as well as a lot of other shapes other than cube, start with a bunch of polys. And we don't necessarily need this many polys, especially since we aren't working with something that's very high detailed. So I'm gonna end up changing the number of edges. So to do that, I will go to the channel box / layer editor on the very right of your screen, and I'm going to click on the inputs, where it says Polysphere 1, and I'll change the subdivision's axes to 15 as well as the height to 15. And as you saw, that lowered the number of polys, and it still looks pretty spherical, but that's also because of the lighting in the scene right now. High poly models can end up causing lower performance. To create the second sphere, I can press Control D, and that is duplicate. And then I moved it up to right above the midsection and scaled it. All right, and now I'm creating the cone for the bottom of the character. And for this cone, you see it starts out in the incorrect direction. So in that channel box again, I'm going to have to rotate it. I'm gonna have to figure out which axis to rotate it on, but I can always Control Z if I mess up. I'm rotating it 180 on the x-axis and then scaling it, and then that looks about right. Also, something I didn't do while I was recording this video is I didn't do modify freeze transformations. The best thing to do after you've done your rotations, your scales, your translates, is to modify freeze transformations. The reason for this is sometimes if you don't do this, it will pop up in Unity all messed up because your modeling software thinks that it is not starting at its origin. So it thinks that your origin is somewhere else than where you've translated or rotated it to. So it's good to freeze the transformations because it tells your model that this position is the new origin. All right, now we have the basic shapes for each of the parts of the model. And now I'm going to work on the buttons on the back side of the model. For this, I'm going to right-click, hold on one of my objects, and I need to move into face mode. So when you right-click, hold on an object, you'll notice a bunch of options. All right, and these different modes are object mode, which is to select the entire object, and it will show up green. Face mode, and that allows us to select a specific face, which would be one of the rectangles on the sphere. And edge mode would be an edge, and the vertexes are the points. You should mess around with that, and as you move between modes, you can see what changes when you try to select things, but you'll need to move between these modes all the time. It's always good to get in a habit when you're done editing a specific part of your model to move that part back into object mode so you don't accidentally mess it up again. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I'm selecting the parts of the model that I want to extrude as a part of the button. So I'm selecting the 4 faces, and after that, I'm going to go to the right part of my screen, press on Modeling Tools tab, and then from there under Components, I'll press Extrude. And after I extrude, I'm going to want to raise the thickness, and that is the distance that you extrude these faces from the model. And most models in poly modeling are made up essentially of basic shapes and extrusions. The only reason I'm using multiple parts in this model is because this model is primarily made up of basic shapes, but if you're making something complex like a car, then it would be good to start from a square or rectangle, and then from there make a bunch of extrusions to make it into the shape instead of adding different parts together. Then I would use something like a cylinder for the wheels because it would be hard to extrude something so round as the wheel from the rectangle. So for round things, I tend to either use curve modeling or a different type of rounder shape, or I smooth as well. You can also use smooth to create that effect. All right, going to extrude the other button, and I'm just pulling on the blue arrow because it does the same thing as changing the thickness. All right, from here, I'm going to edit the head. For this part, I'm going to select all of the faces that make up the back of the head. And it would be really hard to select all of these faces one by one. So the first thing I tried was, click one face, hold down Shift, and double click the face right next to it, and that creates an edge loop selection. And an edge loop is basically a bunch of edges that are in the same direction, and you can select all of those at the same time. I'm doing a face loop selection, but as you see, that still will take a long time because I have a bunch of face loops to select. So instead, I'm going to rotate the entire sphere in object mode, and that way it's perfectly lined up with the reference. Hold down and drag select half of the faces. It was a little imperfect, so I want to Control Z to before that extrude panel is up, and then select the rest of the faces. And then I will go ahead and extrude. Okay, so we've got the general shape of the head, and I'm going to fix the sizing a bit because on the reference the head is bigger than the body, so I'll rescale the head to be bigger than the body. All right, and to create the bottom part of the model, normally I would just create an edge loop through a multi-cut, but because we have a bunch of triangles, this is the problem with triangles, is you can't make an edge loop around across triangles. So you just simply can't do that, which is why it's bad to work in triangles because it ruins up your edge loop flow. So instead, I'm going to select the face of the cone and extrude and separate the cone into two different sections. All right, now I'm edge loop selecting the midsection of the cone, and to do that, you just double click on one of the edges, and it should select all of the edges across that, along that line. Just adjusting to make that general shape. And you'll see that I'm getting annoyed with not being able to see the tail, so I'm just gonna move the reference a bit so it's easier to see. Going into vertex mode to move the vertex of the point of the cone. And at this point, I'm like, hey, the midsection is still pretty pointy. We don't have that exact shape. It's not as smooth as I'd like it. I can't simply smooth this part of the model because it will ruin the edge of the cone. So instead, I'm going to select that edge loop around the midsection of the cone and then press bevel, which is on the right side under the modeling tools tab, right next to where we pressed extrude. And that will smooth down that edge if I select the number of subdivisions that I want. I think 3 segments are going to be good. All right, and it looks pretty accurate from there. Okay, so we have a lot of the base parts. I guess the next base part to work on are those ears. You probably can guess what shape we'll be using for the ears at this point. Yep, you're right, a cone. We'll be moving the vertex and rotating and adjusting the cone to be more accurate to the reference. Also, I'm saving at this point. All right, now that we've got the general shape of that cone, I'm going to give you guys a tip. Because we want to limit the number of polys that we generally have on characters, no one needs to see the bottom face of that cone because it is inside the character's head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into wireframe mode. You can see I'm clicking on a box that's right above our viewport that looks like a transparent cube. That is our wireframe mode. Right next to it is our shaded mode. You'll be going between those two as you model, because sometimes it's the only way you can see inside of your model. Also helps when you're making a mouth pocket, when you're making insides of mouths for characters. But another way to go into wireframe mode is to press 4. So 4 is the hotkey for wireframe, and 6 is shaded. Shaded is basically you can't see through the model, and you can also see the textures. And as you see, I'm going to go into face mode on that cone and select that bottom face and delete it because no one's going to see it, so you might as well not have it take up any more face. So we got that general cone, and now we have to make the fins on the ears. Also, the reason why I'm not making both sides right now is because we can just mirror it later, and it reduces the work instead of having to do it twice. Plus, it allows for better symmetry. So one problem I have working with cones or things that have a lot of triangles on them, when I extrude, there's a lot less I'll be able to do. I'll have a lot less freedom in terms of manipulating that shape. It's just going to be a lot harder for you to work with. So for this fin, to make it easier for myself, I am instead going to start with a cube. All right, and I'll move it to the general size and shape of that fin. I'll scale some of the faces to make it more accurate to the size. And here is where we're going to make our first multi-cut. We're going to have to extrude the sides of that fin to separate into 3 pointed parts. I'm going to have to make an edge loop. And to do that, I'm going to make sure that I am in an editing mode, and then I'll go to the right side under modeling tools and press multi-cut, which is under tools. And multi-cut allows you to manually make edges along your model. Yeah, if you hold down shift, you'll be able to see that you create a line that goes around your entire model. This is an edge loop, and it allows for consistency around your model. You'll be able to select the edges the face loops way better. Also, it prevents n-gons. If I just made a cut that was across a single face, then the adjacent face will now have 5 edges, which is bad. Potentially all of it won't render. It can cause a lot of problems. So definitely, generally, just when you're using this tool, hold down Control and create that multi-cut. If you want to be accurate to exact percentages, have the same distance between each of your multi-cuts, then you can hold down shift while holding Control, and then that allows you to have exact percentages, so 10%, 20%, 30%, and onwards. All right, so here I'm making a cut about halfway around the model, and then I deselect multi-cut. Make sure to always deselect your tools after you use them, because you might forget you're in that mode and make further cuts, which you can always Control Z. Some of the worst things you can do, it doesn't really happen as much as in multi-cut, but I've had this happen in extrude mode where because you forgot to move the face before exiting the mode, and then you now have 2 overlapping faces. And that can cause problems when you're texturing, and it's really hard to remember where you have overlapping faces. The only way to fix this is really edit mesh merge. And even that, sometimes you can't fully fix it. If you go enter extrude mode, if you plan to not actually make an extrude, remember to Control Z out of that extrude mode. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is select the sides of the fin, which I'm going to have to extrude to create the 3 parts of the fin. And near the bottom, we don't really have that three fin split, so I'm going to use target weld, which is in our tools on the right side, modeling tools, to one edge and drag it into the other. And that just merges the 2 edges, since we don't need that to be in 3 parts. Of course, that creates triangles, but I don't think that will affect us that much. You'll notice all of a sudden the model has become rounded. And so what I did is I am entering preview smooth mode because I'm anticipating that I will have to smooth this part of the model in order to make it look smoother. To enter preview smooth mode, because sometimes we don't want to smooth yet before we finish all our changes, you're going to press 3. And if you want to enter back into what it actually looks like, you'll press 1. So I'll make a few adjustments now, moving some of the edges to make the 3 parts more exaggerated. Oh, and I have to exit my target weld mode. And I'll create another extrusion to exaggerate the 3 parts of the fin and do a little bit more tweaking. All right, so now that I have the general shape that I want, I'm going to exit preview smooth, going back to 1. So now I'm simply going to press smooth, which is under mesh and modeling tools tab. All right, and in the smooth, you can edit the number of divisions. So be careful when you add divisions and don't put in a really big number because that could crash your entire software because you just made an extremely high poly mesh. All right, and I'll make some adjustments. All right, and there we have the fin. And if I want to be more accurate to our reference, I'm going to adjust the fin so that you can see the cone poking out in front of the fin. I'm going to teach you guys a nice tool that you can use. This tends to happen when you have higher poly models, like if you're working on a very high poly model face and you're trying to edit an entire cheek, but that you don't want to have to select all of those faces of the cheek. And even at that, it might not be as rounded and it might mess the organic look of that shape. Just select parts in a sort of gradient. Affect one part more than others, but also slightly affect the faces around it. You're gonna have to use soft selection. So I'm gonna enter face mode, select the face, which is the general center point of the area that I want to adjust. And then I'll press B. B is the hotkey for soft selection. And you're gonna wanna make sure you're using a mouse at this point. Hold down the B key, hold down left click, and then scroll to adjust the radius of that soft selection. So this is a lot for adjusting soft selection. You can also adjust soft selection if you double click your move tool on the left side. I believe there's soft selection edits in there, but I don't really know how that works. I just do it this way. So yellow means the faces that you are going to be moving more, and red is like the fall off, the parts that are being adjusted less. And blue are the parts that are not being affected at all. So this is good if you're doing a little bit more organic modeling. Aw, Temmie just sat in my lap, guys. All right, so I'm going to do something now in order to adjust the entire direction of the ear. I'm going to go to Mesh, Combine. Well, make sure you select both parts of the model in object mode. This will combine two different parts of the model into one, so you can move them as one. But if you ever want to separate them again, you would just go to Mesh, Separate. All right, so now we have the ear completed. And now I want to create that bottom part of the fin. So you could try doing that with an extrude by selecting a bunch of faces and extruding. I think that might actually work, but I'm going to do instead the same thing I did for the top fins, which is start with a rectangle, because I can't guarantee that it's going to work out as well as I want if just with extrusions, because I just don't trust triangles. Triangles are harder to edit. I am able to customize a rectangle more to what I want than if I was working with triangles. I'm going to create the top part of the fin that goes into the cone. I'm going to keep it relatively pretty short because you'll see, we'll create the shape of the tail through curve modeling. I'm going to teach you guys extruding along a curve. I am going to go back to the multiple viewports on the left side of the screen. I'm going to go to my front view so that I can see the side of the model. All right, and now you're going to go to your Curves tab, which is right next to the Poly Modeling tab near the top left of the screen. And then we'll press the S-looking tool, and this is our Curve tool. So this allows us to create curves. All right, starting from where our cube was, I will click where it starts, and then I will keep clicking in the general direction of that curve. And you see it is making a line. And once you're done with that curve, you're just going to press enter. You can control Z at any point if you messed up. Now that I have the curve finished, I will right click hold on that curve and press control vertex. You can also do this by editing the point, either works, but I made some curves that are not exactly how I want it, and if I want to be more precise, I can edit the control vertex or edit the points to change the general shape. And then once the side of the model looks good, I'm going to want to move to look at the front of the model so that I can make sure it has the correct curve along two different axes. I'm not sure if I mentioned this already, but if you press shift and click on, let's see, I press shift and then I click on the other vertex. That allows me to click multiple vertexes at once. Also, let's say I wanted to select a bunch of faces and I kind of want to paint over that selection. I will hold down tab and drag my mouse over every face that I want. And then if you want to get rid of a face or edge or whatever in a selection, you'll press down Control. And now I'm going to do the extrusion along the curve now that the curve is in the shape that I want. I will go into object mode, select the face of the model that I want to extrude, then click on the curve, and then you press extrude. As you see, it is generally making that shape, but it's not accurate. To make it accurate, you're going to need to raise the divisions. All right, so about 11 divisions should be good. And would you look at that? We have the general shape, and we didn't have to extrude a bunch to create it. A few things I have to clean up because of this curve is I'm going to move into object mode on that tail and press Alt-Shift-D. Alt-Shift-D is basically deleting the object history, which means that the curve and the object are no longer going to be connected. That way I can delete the curve and just be left with that object. If you don't get rid of that curve, it might mess up the import into Unity, so it's good to delete it. Okay, and I'm going to do some general shape adjustments using that soft select so that I can be more accurate now that it is a pretty organic shape. There's like an edge over there, edge loop that's going into another edge, and I don't really like that. It's not so clean. So I'm going to double click on that edge, delete, and now we have gotten rid of that edge. The vertices are still there. That's creating an n-gon because we didn't get rid of those points. So I'm going to drag select over all of the vertices and press delete, and it will delete any vertices that are not connected to an edge. The last thing I'm going to do for the tail is merge that bottom piece to be more pointed. Since it's very pointed on the model, I'm going to be okay with having triangles here. But we're going to use our target weld tool to connect these two edges. One of the last things I'm going to teach you is mirroring. So now that I have everything accurate on at least one side of my model, I'm going to select the head of the model, and I want to combine the head with the ear. So we'll combine that all into one shape. Alt-Shift-D to delete the history. We're going to go to Mesh Mirror. Mirroring is going to be a huge tool to use when you are working with symmetrical parts of characters, or symmetrical anything. You can either be in object or world mode on the axis position, and that's basically saying, am I mirroring in accordance to the object, or am I mirroring in accordance to the world space? So you can just play around with these things, see what works best. But what works to mirror the ear for this is to mirror over the world's axis position and select Z as the axis and change the direction to positive. And voila, we have ears on both sides of the head. But sometimes the center of the object doesn't merge correctly. So something that's a good practice to do is to go to Edit Mesh and Merge. What Edit Mesh Merge does is it combines any vertices or edges that are overlapping or almost overlapping. And if you adjust the value on Edit Mesh Merge, you can choose how far away these vertices have to be before they combine. So it can be tricky when you're working with high poly things because then you have like the very inner parts of eyes or the lips of a character are touching. And if you aren't careful, you can accidentally merge the lips to be basically zippered closed. So be careful when you're using this tool. You can mess up, but it is also an important tool to know. All right, so I'm going to now select all parts, drag select in object mode, all parts of the model and mesh combine so it is one entire axolotl. I'm going to Alt-Shift-D so it is no longer connected to the old part of the model. I'm going to rename it to just axolotl and get in the habit of doing naming conventions before you export. Yeah, technical artists, your programmers will hate you if you are not naming your models, so make sure to name them before you export. Just double click on the name, you can edit it. You can also change it in the channel box. All right, and now we have a fully combined axolotl model. Yay! I'm saving. I don't want to lose all this. All right, I pressed Alt-Shift-D. As you can tell, because I pressed Alt-Shift-D, you can't see the edits in the history. This allows it to be easier if you're working in Maya to access your material, which is called Lambert 1. So Alt-Shift-D is generally good to do when you're all done modeling. The last thing we're going to do is go to Mesh and Clean Up, but instead of just pressing Clean Up, I'm going to press the box right next to the Cleanup tool. What Cleanup does, it is a super handy Maya tool that allows you to clean up all the n-gons, all of the faces inside of other faces, the faces with holes, basically the fucked up parts of your model. And we are cleaning it up so that if we messed up earlier, at least it is something that is importable and will not break our Unity. You should have similar settings to mine. You can see what I have checked. And when all my settings are correct, I'll press Cleanup. And you can see a little bit of what it did here. That top part of the tail on the cone, you can see there's been a lot of triangles that were created. That's because we actually had an n-gon on the top of that cone. And because it's a lot of the tail is in triangles now, I hate looking at it this way. In case if you want to manipulate anything again, I'm going to go to Mesh Quadrangulate. And Mesh Quadrangulate is basically taking that model and changing all the triangles that we can back into quads. Okay, the only thing I'm going to do now is just clean up this part where cleanup is not always accurate. Sometimes it will fuck up things and you'll have to clean the topology. And that's why you should generally just practice only making things in quads and triangles, because cleaning up topology is annoying. But I'm going to delete these two edges and just use multi-cut to create an edge between these two other edges, getting rid of that n-gon. All right, and now our model is fully clean. It is all combined, it is labeled, and it is perfect to give to a texture artist. And you have created your first model. Congratulations, guys, your first model, woohoo! And please come and watch or participate in the texturing workshop where we'll be going over different ways to texture. We'll be going over materials in softwares. We'll be going over UV mapping, texturing in platforms like Photoshop, in Substance Painter, and even Procreate 3D. But there's a bunch of tools which you can use for this. But thank you so much for watching the Autodesk version. My preference for Autodesk Maya is the hotkeys, which I feel is a lot more natural than Blender hotkeys, but people will argue with me. I guess it's just that all that I've been used to and I now prefer it. But again, it is not open source and it is not free, so hence it is not perfect. But let's hope that we are eventually hired by the industry and have our companies pay for us to use softwares like this. But anyways, thank you so much for listening and for participating in this workshop. And goodbye. Have fun modeling. And feel free to contact Nicolette if you need any help or have any questions. Even when I'm alumni, I would very much like to help because I love modeling, I love 3D art, and I love studio. Okay, bye guys.